We're at that part of the study when we're talking about children, youth, and the responsibility that parents have to teach and train those children. And it is very important that parents realize they are actually responsible for children that God has given to them, entrusted it to them. They're responsible for them. And they are responsible to bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. And tragically today, we're not seeing that like we should. God is telling Israel, as to pick up where we left off the last time, God is telling Israel that the Word of God is to be a part of their everyday conversation. Now, what that basically means, as we saw the last time, that throughout the day, in the home, around the home, and associated with the things of the home, conversations by the parents should include their children and their relationship with God and talking about the things of God so that they grow up with this as it's normal, not something that's abnormal. And tragically today, many times, children do not have parents that actually spend time as much as they should with them to give them instruction in the things of God. And often today, if they do spend time with them, it's in regards to the things of this life, the temporal things of this life. And in ancient Israel, that was something that was not permitted. And yet it's tragic today that it seems that so many Christians, except for an hour or two on Sunday, that's about the only real connection with the things of God. And as soon as the last amen is said, out to the cars we go and off to do whatever, and nevermore is the things of God mentioned, talked about, or thought about. I thank God that I grew up in a home where my parents talked about the things of God frequently, often daily, and almost everything, but one point, a time or another, a discussion would always center around the things of God. And so I grew up in that environment. And I knew a lot of the things that were talked about as a young child. But today, a lot of children don't have that. But it's very important that they have that. Proverbs 22, verse 6. Train up a child in the way he should go. This is not a suggestion. This is actually a command of God. It's not a suggestion. It's not do this if it's convenient or you can work this into your busy schedules. Train up a child means teach them. The up part here is progressively growing. From the youngest age, grades, years, each step up, each year that passes, they're growing. And we're talking about the things of God. And it starts as soon as they can begin to talk. You talk about those things. That's why it's train up. You start and you go on up. In the way he should go, the way he should live, and when he is old. The word old here does not mean 95 years old. It doesn't mean anything like that. It means when this child, when you started teaching them at a very young age, and as you would teach them, as they grew to maturity. And in ancient Israel, they recognized the fact that a human being did not come to full maturity till the age 30. Today, we give 18-year-olds that level of thinking. They're mature at 18. They're not. They may have a lot of knowledge, May even be a lot of technical knowledge, but they're not mature. But I'm simply talking about training up a child, and when they're old, when they reach maturity, is literally what he's saying here. When they're old, they reach maturity. Hebrews 30. By the way, the studies today confirmed that the Hebrews knew what they were talking about. The studies today indicate, yes, it's true. We do not fully mature mentally, emotionally, and psychologically until we get to around 30 years of age. And today we oftentimes throw these kids, these young people, into situations and circumstances that their maturity level will not enable them to process properly. This is one of the reasons why that those in the military who have seen action, particularly when they're in the very youthful part, 18, 19, 20, 20-somethings, that they come home, they have all these different psychological, emotional damage to their very psyche because they saw and experienced things they were not mature enough to deal with in a proper way. They couldn't handle it. Tragic it is to see that. When he is old or mature, he will not depart from it. It doesn't mean that you're teaching them about the things of God. You give them the gospel message for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, whatever. You're giving this to them that when they hit 30, they're going to be a Christian. No, it doesn't mean that. It simply means what they have been taught will never fully leave their minds. When they're 40, 50, 60, 75, 100, they will still remember those things. As a toddler, about 2 years old, I remember the prayer that my parents taught me at night. I remember it to this day. I could see in my mind my mom and dad standing by my crib, the jail bars, and looking over at me, and I'm looking up at them. And they had to tell me it's time to pray. And the prayer that they taught me, now I lay me down to sleep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. That, as you see, I remember from a toddler. That's what this passage is saying. Studies show today 75% of everything a person learns in their life is learned within the first 5 years. And that's a fact. You will spend the rest of your life learning the other 25%. I had a professor in Bible college that during the summer months, he and his wife, since the college was closed for June, July, and August, he would travel around to various churches to hold children's meetings. And in the class that he taught, that I took from him, was Christian education. And in that class, we discussed such things as, when do you begin teaching your children the plan of salvation, giving them the gospel, the Word of God, seeking to get a commitment out of them? And he said in his experience, he had known children as young as 2 years old that could articulate the gospel. And he went on to say that even though he had a lot of things in the youth and children's ministries He knew that many of these young people, these children, would make decisions that they really didn't know or understand or mean. And he went on to point it out. He said, though, that he knew that a lot of these kids, when they became teenagers, like mid-teens, 15, 16, 17, in that area, they would renew their commitment to Christ. And when asked why they were renewing their commitment to Christ when they were 3, 4, 5, 6, had made a commitment to Christ then, it said, just to be sure, because I'm very much aware the relationship is important in my salvation. And so they renew that commitment. And he said that often happens. Not in every case, but it does happen. Again, it is important. Again, the command. Here's a command right here. Train up the child the way it should go. Not a suggestion, but a command. And then the promise that it will never depart from them. They're always going to remember it. They may reject it, but sometimes they don't reject it. They actually receive it. Even if it's later in life, it becomes the soil in their soul that has been prepared to receive the truth and to believe as a result of these teachings. Very important. Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4. And you fathers, provoke not your children to wrath. The word provoke here is to create an atmosphere in which the child that you're teaching and training is frustrated. They really yet haven't got enough maturity to fully grasp what you're saying to them, and yet you're pressuring them to do it, to believe it, to accept it, to practice it, to take on the responsibility. And what this does is it frustrates the child. And they get angry. They're angry with their parents, their father, their mother. They're angry with themselves, and they're angry against God. Because they are being pressured to fit into a mold with understanding and practice that they're not mature enough yet to grasp that fully. So that's why he says, command of the fathers, provoke not your children to wrath. Don't try to force them to accept the responsibility that they are not old enough to have the cognition or the aptitude, or even in some cases the physical ability to actually do what you're teaching and commanding them to do. You've got to be discerning of this. You've got to be paying attention to the need. How are we to bring them up? Here's the answer. But bring them up. Again, this is an action. We're talking about training them from the lowest level, growing, maturing all the way. Training them up, how? In the nurture. The word nurture here means in loving kindness to the child. You're loving and you're kind to the child. You're not putting that child under undue stress and pressure that they're not able to achieve. Let me give you an example of some of the areas that parents push their children, no matter what grade they are in school. Little Johnny, little Susie has got to come home with an A. And that oftentimes they're not mature enough yet to achieve an A in the particular test. Well, they're a smart kid. Yes, they should. Every child matures at a different rate. No two mature at the same level all the time. They don't do that. One child may excel quickly. Another child mature slowly. And parents got to recognize and realize this. Bring them up in the nurture, loving kindness, and admonition. This part here is encouraging them to accept responsibility for the things that they actually have the capacity and the maturity to understand, and the physical and mental ability to perform and live that way. Admonition, what? Of the Lord. Teaching them the commands of the Lord in a loving and kind way is what fathers. Why does he say fathers but doesn't say mothers? He says fathers because it's the father's first and primary responsibility to see that their children, be they boys or girls, are raised in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. The father is the head of the house. It's his responsibility. And God expects him to do and handle those things. The mother will simply carry on what the father has set the pace for with the children. She will support that, she will encourage that, and she will see that the children grow like their father has been instructing them to do. And here's where we see the responsibility of fathers. The responsibility of fathers. There should be loving correction and discipline in the scripturally ordered home. Well, now we're going to get into an area that society has basically said, you can't do this to a child. You can't have this kind of discipline. Let me illustrate what is often taught today, and it's taught to young parents. Your child is misbehaving. Considering its maturity, your child is misbehaving. And so you want to correct that misbehavior. How do you do that? Well, we are being taught today by those who call themselves professionals in this matter that you're to try to reason with the child. Sit down and reason with the child. Explain to the child why they need to do this or why they need to stop doing what they're doing. Tell them all that. Then after you've told them all that, they should do what you said. But if they don't, you're told, don't get frustrated with this now. The second technique you now use is redirect their activity. In other words, they may be involved in activity that you don't want them involved in. So you're going to reason with them and try to reason with them and show them why that activity is bad and why they shouldn't be doing it, and expecting that child to abandon that activity. But they don't. So now you immediately want to change the subject and refocus them on some other activity that is acceptable and the right thing to do. Now, all that sounds pretty good on paper. But it's quite obvious that those people haven't really raised any children. Remember, the first 5 years, children learn 75% of everything they're going to learn in life. The youngest of children, I'm talking about babes in arms, very quickly know how to get the attention of mom and dad. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And mom and dad do what? they respond. They learn that. That's all they have to do. And by the time they're 5 years old, they know how to manipulate mom and dad are clueless that they're being manipulated. A few years ago, a 5-year-old girl was in kindergarten. And in kindergarten, she decided to have a meltdown. She had apparently grew up with having meltdowns to get her own way. In order to get her quiet and settle her down, they would accommodate that 5-year-old. Whatever she wanted, she got. All she had to do was just let it all hang out until she got what she wanted. Well, she was in kindergarten. And in kindergarten, they had a kindergarten teacher, and then they had another person in there to assist and help the teacher. That day, she decided that she wanted something or didn't want something or whatever. She had a meltdown. It totally interrupted the entire class. The assistant to the teacher tried to redirect her attention to get her settled down. That did not work. Then the teacher had to stop the class, and she came and tried to get this 5-year-old girl to settle down, take her seat, and participate properly in class. That didn't work either. Now you got to remember that the school board had made a rule that you could not physically touch the child. So all he could do was talk. That didn't work. The principal was called in. So he comes in and tries to settle the child down. Again, he can't physically touch the child. That didn't work. By this time, this has gone on for a half hour, 45 minutes, upwards of an hour. All activity as far as the class was concerned was just watching what this girl have her meltdown, wanting what she wanted. And they weren't willing to give that to her, so she just continued it on. And the principal come to the conclusion there's nothing we can do. Apparently he tried to call the parents. Neither parents was available. Or at least they didn't answer their phone. So what's he going to do? He calls the police. And the police show up. They come into this room where this girl is still just showing herself unbelievably a mess. And the policeman tries to talk her down. It doesn't work. And so he says to the teacher and to the principal and to the assistant, I am going to have to take her out, put her in handcuffs, and put her in the car. And he did. Does anybody see anything wrong with that? There is such a thing as discipline. Children very quickly know and learn that there are certain things that mom and dad and later on as teachers and instructors, whether it's in school or church or other places, that they have to be submissive to what they are told to do by those individuals. They know that. They learned that. But they also learn how to work the system. You can reason with a child as long as they're reasonable. And sometimes that's all that it takes. They're reasonable. And you can reason with them. Other times you have to go into a little more depth. But at other times after that, you simply have to move forward and do what is necessary. What is necessary? Well, Proverbs 13:24 says this: He that spareth his rod hateth his son, but he that loveth him chasteneth him betimes. That's an old 1611 King James word, which simply means on several occasions, whenever the occasion required that. Well, let's talk about the rod. Sometimes we look at this rod, and this is, we have a tendency to think that this is some sort of stick to beat the child into submission with. It's not. It's not. The rod represents the rule, the order, the enforcer of the rule and the order. It is to be used wisely. It is to be used sparingly. But it is to be used in loving correction and discipline. Not anger, not malice, not trying to injure, hurt the individual, but to correct them, to get them on the right path. Sometimes a child brings a parent to the point they need to take a disciplinary action. When I was growing up in those days, they talked about the Board of Education that is applied to the seat of learning. And everybody knew what that was. School teachers could actually spank a child. They had the legal right to do that. Later, it changed. The principal had to spank the child. The teacher could not touch them. Then that changed. Nobody can touch the child. Boy, they learned that they got to have, hey, I can get away with anything. At some point, authority has to discipline correction. The Bible's not talking about abusing, misusing, but rather talking about when all else fails, you need to set the child in order. There are certain things you cannot do, you cannot get away with, you cannot have your way in this situation. You must conform to our instruction, or there's a penalty to be paid. And again, remember, they learn very quickly. And if mom and dad are loving, correctional, and disciplinarians, the child will learn that. I grew up as the only child. Very quickly I learned I couldn't get away with anything with my mom. I mean, I loved her, she loved me, and I knew that. And I also knew that when she said no, it meant no. And it wasn't a half-hour discussion after that, trying to get that point across. When I was told to do something, that I needed to do. My father also was a disciplinarian. There are certain things that were not permitted, certain things I could not do. And I'd say, yeah, but this person does. This one down there, that neighbor's kid does that. They do that at school. Dad says, I don't care. You live here with us. You're going to do it our way. He was kind. He was fair. He was firm. But he could be a disciplinarian too. We need to realize that that is a very important thing. Again, it speaks of often. Look what God says. He that spares, basically little or no disciplinary action, no matter what the child does, spares the rod so that the child gets away. He actually is hating his child, his son or his daughter. He that loveth them will correct them many times. Disciplinary action to be taken many times.